What if everything you thought you knew about the royal children was wrong? Not slightly off, not exaggerated, but fundamentally, irreversibly, historically wrong. What if the biggest secret the modern British monarchy has ever carried didn't involve affairs, feuds, or money, but the parentage of two children the world believes it watched enter the royal family? That's the question no one expected to hear inside a courtroom this week. Yet there it was, hanging in the air like a lightning bolt waiting to strike. A judge leaning forward, attorneys frozen, spectators holding their breath. And at the center of it all, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, exchanging the kind of panicked glance that only two people hiding the same truth share. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Before anyone could make sense of what was happening, Harry stepped forward. His voice cracked. His hands shook. Meghan's jaw tightened. And the bombshell they dropped was so severe, so destabilizing, that even their own legal team looked blindsided. But what actually happened in that courtroom? Why did they apologize? What exactly did they admit? And how did this alleged revelation, that they are not the biological parents of Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, arrive at this moment, in this setting, under these pressures? Those are the questions everyone is asking. But the answers, as you're about to hear, are far more complicated, far more emotional, and far more shocking than anyone could have predicted. Because this wasn't just a confession. It wasn't just a courtroom surprise. It wasn't just an awkward apology or a technical clarification. This was something else, something deeper, something that has been building for years. Something that ties together suspicious timelines, contradictions in their public statements, a series of sealed documents, and, according to sources present, a level of tension between Harry and Meghan so sharp you could almost feel it from across the aisle. But before we get to the confession, the documents, the unexpected witness, and the DNA twist that erupted into headlines, we need to start right where everything changed. In a courtroom so silent you could hear the air vents humming. Harry stepped forward first, and every reporter in that room wrote the same thing. It looked like he had been carrying a weight for years and finally collapsed under it. But why now? Why here? What forced the couple to address this story in a courtroom, instead of the polished comfort of a television interview or a carefully worded press release? Why risk humiliation in front of a judge? Why risk legal consequences? Why willingly enter a situation where cross-examination is unavoidable? Something pushed them to a breaking point. Something forced their hand. And according to people seated in the courtroom, something about the documents presented, the ones sealed for years, caused a shift in the couple's demeanor so dramatic, so immediate, that it felt like watching a dam crack in real time. But let's slow down. Let's paint this moment clearly, because once we enter the heart of this story, the twists will come fast, and you'll need every detail. Picture the courtroom. Long wooden benches, the faint smell of paper and old varnish, lawyers whispering, reporters clutching their phones, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then Harry and Meghan entered. You know how some public figures walk into a room with the choreography of confidence? Not this time. Harry looked exhausted. Meghan looked alert, overly alert, like someone preparing to control a narrative that kept slipping through her fingers. Direct question to you. Have you ever seen someone trying to stay calm while every muscle in their face betrays them? That was Meghan. Have you ever seen someone trying to look brave while their eyes tell you they're terrified? That was Harry. Every camera trained on them sensed something was off. And then the judge called for quiet. There was a moment, a long, heavy moment, where no one moved. Then Harry stood up. Reporters present said it felt like his voice belonged to a man who had rehearsed a sentence 1,000 times, but still wasn't ready to say it. He apologized. Not a vague apology. Not a carefully engineered royal, "Sorry if you were offended." This was something different. His voice cracked. He swallowed hard. His eyes dropped to the floor. Meghan looked straight ahead, unblinking. But for what exactly was he apologizing? That's the part no one expected. Because he didn't apologize for behavior. He didn't apologize for comments. He didn't apologize for media conflicts or royal family feuds. He apologized for something that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. He apologized for misleading the public about the circumstances of Archie and Lilibet's births. He apologized for statements that, according to him, were not fully accurate. He apologized for maintaining a narrative that we believed was best at the time. And that careful phrasing, raised more questions than answers. What does not fully accurate mean? How does someone maintain a narrative about something as monumental as the birth of a child? And why would best at the time matter unless there was something they were trying to hide? The judge pressed him. The attorneys exchanged glances. Meghan's expression didn't change, but her grip on the table tightened enough that her knuckles turned white. This wasn't an argument about privacy. This wasn't an argument about media intrusion. This was something deeper, something tied to documents the court had in its possession and something the couple could no longer avoid addressing. But Meghan didn't stay silent. When she stood up, her tone was the opposite of Harry's. Where Harry sounded fragile, Meghan sounded controlled. Where Harry hesitated, Meghan spoke with precision. Where Harry apologized, Meghan clarified. That contrast set the courtroom buzzing. Because if they were telling the same story, why didn't they sound aligned? Why didn't they look aligned? Why did Harry's apology feel like a confession, while Meghan's explanation felt like a defense? Direct question to you. What does it usually mean when two people telling the same truth sound like they're reading from two different scripts? Exactly. Something wasn't matching. Something in their rhythm was off. And that imbalance made the next few minutes feel like waiting for a bomb to detonate. Meghan stated, firmly, that certain details had been inaccurately portrayed by the media. She emphasized privacy, protection, and choices made for the well-being of the children. But then, and this is where everything tilted, she acknowledged discrepancies in the public timeline of the children's births. Discrepancies she did not explain. Discrepancies she seemed deeply unwilling to expand on. Discrepancies the judge immediately honed in on. Why did Archie's birth certificate change after the fact? Why did the hospital location remain unconfirmed for weeks? Why were there conflicting accounts about who was present at Lilibet's birth? Why did Meghan insist on avoiding traditional hospital appearances? Why did their statements contradict known timelines? Some of these questions had floated in the public conversation for years, but now they weren't whispers or tabloid speculation. They were questions coming from a judge. The room tensed. Harry looked down. Meghan's expression hardened. Was this the moment they would finally be forced to clarify everything? Was this the moment the truth, whatever it was, would no longer be manageable? Was this the moment the narrative they had built began to collapse? And that's when the judge said something that shifted the energy instantly. It is time to address the documents. The documents. That phrase sent an electric current through the room, because everyone knew exactly what that meant. Birth documents, medical documents, custody filings, a sealed surrogacy agreement, DNA reports, the kind of materials that don't lie, the kind of materials that can't be spun, the kind of materials that can destroy a narrative completely and instantly. Harry's face fell. Meghan blinked rapidly, just once, the first crack in her courtroom composure. Reporters sat upright. Attorneys stiffened. Because once those documents came into play, nothing could be hidden anymore. And that is precisely why this moment matters right now. Because what happened inside that courtroom isn't just tabloid drama. It isn't just royal gossip. It isn't just a messy couple in a messy moment. This is something that touches on the legitimacy of royal lineage, on the integrity of official statements, on transparency versus secrecy, on the legal definition of parenthood, on where public narrative ends and private truth begins, and most importantly, on the true story of two children who have lived their entire lives under the weight of global attention. But here's the thing. The documents were not immediately shown. The court paused. Attorneys met privately. A short recess was called. And in that brief pause, something happened that changed the entire tone of the hearing. Meghan stood up. Without prompting. Without being addressed. Without warning. And according to every eyewitness, she asked the judge if she could clarify one more thing before the documents are reviewed. The room froze. Harry turned toward her, confused. The judge hesitated, and Meghan stepped forward, clearing her throat. What she said next didn't fully answer the looming questions, but it cracked open the door to the truth. And it set up a revelation so shocking, so deeply unexpected, that when the court reconvened, nothing would be the same. Because Meghan's next sentence wasn't a clarification. It was a pivot that raised even more questions, a pivot that hinted at a hidden third figure, a pivot that pushed Harry into visible panic. A pivot that ignited chaos both inside and outside the courtroom. But that pivot is exactly where the story begins. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Did you ever witness a moment so tense, so brutally raw, that the entire room seemed to inhale and never breathe out again? That's exactly what happened the second Meghan finished her unexpected pivot, the second she stepped forward and asked to clarify something. And the judge, visibly surprised, granted her permission. But before she could go any further, before she could reshape the narrative even slightly, Harry did something no one expected. He cut her off, politely, softly, but unmistakably. And that interruption, that split-second rupture between the two of them, is what set off the chain reaction you're about to hear. So let's pick up right there, because this moment was the spark. The moment that pulled the thread that unraveled everything. The moment that exposed not just a secret, but the emotional fracture behind it. Harry's voice came out quiet at first, trembling under the weight of whatever truth he had been holding back for far too long. But it wasn't the words themselves that shocked everyone. It was the look in his eyes. You know when someone has reached a point where the truth has become heavier than the lie, when hiding it feels like drowning. Harry looked like a man surfacing for air, desperate, shaken, terrified of the consequences, yet more terrified of continuing to carry the burden. And that's where we begin. Harry turned toward the judge, then toward Meghan, then toward the public gallery, as if he needed every witness to understand that this wasn't something he could run from anymore. The room fell into a deeper silence, a silence that wasn't just quiet, but charged, almost electric, like the moment before a storm breaks open the sky. "Your Honor," he said, voice cracking in a way that sent a ripple through the courtroom. "Before any documents are reviewed, there is something I need to say. Something I should have said a long time ago." Pause. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Meghan froze, one hand still lightly resting on the table, her posture suddenly locked in place. No one breathed. Harry swallowed hard, and the room watched the muscles in his throat tighten as he forced the words out. "I have not been honest. Not with the public. Not with the institutions involved. And not with myself." That admission alone would have been seismic. But then he looked directly at Meghan. And the expression on his face wasn't anger, or blame, or accusation. It was resignation. As if he knew, finally, that the truth was no longer negotiable. "Now let me ask you a direct question. Have you ever seen two people working desperately to keep a story straight, but the moment pressure hits, one starts unraveling faster than the other?" That was exactly what was happening here. Meghan's expression didn't move, but her eyes sharpened, her jaw stiffened, her shoulders locked. She wasn't expecting him to break ranks. But Harry didn't falter. "Your Honor," he continued, "I want to apologize for misleading the public about the circumstances surrounding the births of our children." The words dropped like stones. Loud, heavy, unavoidable. Reporters looked at one another in disbelief. Some began scribbling frantically. Others simply gaped, stunned, as if their pens had stopped working. But the word misleading wasn't the shock. It was the way Harry emphasized responsibility. The way he made it clear this was not a miscommunication. This was intentional, deliberate, sustained. You could feel the shift in the courtroom atmosphere, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something colder, anticipation. Because now the question wasn't whether something had been hidden. The question was how deep the deception went. Harry's next words sharpened everything. "There were reasons we did what we did. Reasons we felt we couldn't share the truth at the time. But those reasons no longer justify the pain that continuing the lie would cause." The tension skyrocketed. Meghan's eyes widened, not dramatically, just enough to signal that Harry was now drifting outside the boundaries of whatever their pre-rehearsed agreement had been. She took in a slow breath, but didn't move to stop him. "Not yet. And you, watching this unfold, wouldn't you be asking the same questions? What lie? What truth? What was so important, so heavy, so irreversible, that it required a courtroom apology?" Harry took another breath, shakier this time. "There is something about the births of Archie and Lilibet," he continued, "that the public does not know. Something we hid out of fear." Fear. That word changed everything. Because fear isn't about privacy. Fear isn't about boundaries. Fear is about consequences. And that's when the judge leaned forward. "Prince Harry," the judge said in a controlled tone, Are you confirming that the public narrative regarding the births of your children is not accurate? Harry didn't blink. Yes. The room gasped. Audible gasps. Even seasoned reporters, the kind who've covered every royal scandal for decades, looked blindsided. But here's the twist. This wasn't the climax of the confession. This was just the opening crack. Harry wasn't done. His breathing was unsteady. His hands trembled. But he pushed forward, like a man who knew there was no turning back once the first domino fell. And you must be wondering, why didn't Meghan interrupt him? Why did she let him go on? Why did she stay frozen in place, listening, instead of stepping in to realign the narrative? That's one of the contradictions that make this moment so fascinating. Because this was the first signal that Harry's version of the truth and Meghan's version might not be the same. Harry continued, voice firming up slightly, as though shock was giving way to determination. There are documents that will make everything clear, he said. But before they are reviewed, I need the court to understand that I never intended for things to reach this point. I never wanted a situation where the truth could hurt the people involved. People, not children, not family, not institutions. People, plural. The judge noticed. Everyone noticed. And Meghan, for the first time, glanced sharply toward Harry, her expression not angry, but alarmed, as though he had said something he wasn't supposed to say. The judge seized on it. Which people are you referring to? Prince Harry. Harry hesitated. And in that hesitation, the courtroom felt the weight of 1,000 unsaid truths pressing against him. Finally, he answered. The individuals involved in the births, he said quietly. A shockwave rolled through the room. Several reporters audibly whispered. Attorneys exchanged looks. Even the judge leaned back slightly as the implication sank in. Because now, for the first time, Harry was acknowledging that someone else, someone outside their marriage, played a role in the births of Archie and Lilibet. But here's where things got even more interesting. Harry wasn't finished. There were agreements made, he continued. Arrangements, confidentiality terms, and circumstances that we did not disclose at the time. Arrangements? Confidentiality terms? Are you hearing the language? Those aren't words you use to describe a private family matter. Those are legal terms. Contractual terms. Terms used in surrogacy agreements, custody arrangements, or situations involving medical or third-party participation. The judge pressed again. Are you stating that the births did not occur as described publicly? Harry swallowed again. Yes. A simple word, but devastating. And here's where the emotional tension became almost unbearable, because while Harry's voice softened, Meghan's posture stiffened. She looked like someone bracing herself against a wave she could no longer stop. Harry glanced at her again, and for the first time, you could see the fracture between them fully exposed. This wasn't a united front. This wasn't a coordinated story. This was a man unraveling under the pressure of documents, witnesses, and truths too heavy to maintain. Let me ask you something directly. Have you ever been in a situation where one person is ready to come clean and the other is still fighting to control the narrative? That's exactly what this looked like. The judge gave Harry space to continue. And then came the moment that changed the entire case. Harry said, Your Honor, the documents will show that Meghan and I. He stopped. His voice broke. Meghan closed her eyes for a brief second, the smallest crack in her composure. We are not the biological parents of Archie and Lilibet. The courtroom erupted. Gasps. Shouts. Reporters scrambling. Attorneys pushing to their feet. The judge hammering the gavel. Security stepping forward. Harry stood there, unmoving, eyes wet, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. And Meghan? She didn't look shocked. She didn't look devastated. She looked furious, not at the truth itself, but at the fact that it had been spoken aloud. But here's the part no one expected. Right after that confession, in the chaos of the moment, Harry added something else. Something quieter. Something darker. Something Meghan did not want spoken. It wasn't supposed to be revealed like this, he whispered. Not before the other documents. The other documents? Everyone heard it. Everyone froze again. Because what other documents could possibly be more explosive than the confession he had just made? What more could there possibly be to reveal? And that is where the cliffhanger slams into place, because the judge immediately called for order and announced. What do you do when someone you've built a story with suddenly stops following the script? What do you do when the person standing beside you, The person who was supposed to be your partner in maintaining a carefully controlled narrative suddenly drops a truth you never planned to reveal. That was the exact energy in the courtroom the moment Meghan turned toward Harry after his confession. Not a look of shock, not a look of heartbreak, but a look that said, "You were never supposed to say that out loud." And that look is what set the stage for everything that followed. Because Chapter 2 isn't just about Meghan's version of events. It's about the cracks, the inconsistencies, the shifting tones, the moments where her explanation didn't align with Harry's. It's about the way she tried to steer the narrative in a different direction, one that protected her, softened the truth, and reshaped the story into something more strategic, more managed. But the problem? The judge wasn't interested in strategy. The documents weren't interested in strategy. And Harry, already shaking from the emotional weight of his confession, was in no shape to defend a half-truth anymore. So let's re-enter the moment exactly where we left off. The courtroom was still buzzing from Harry's revelation. Reporters had their phones up. Attorneys were whispering urgently. The judge was banging the gavel, fighting to regain control. And Meghan? She rose to her feet with a speed that didn't match her usual poised, deliberate movements. She didn't wait to be addressed. She didn't wait for calm. She didn't wait for Harry to finish. "Your Honor," she said sharply, cutting through the chaos. "With all due respect, the situation is being misrepresented." Instant tension, instant confusion, instant contradiction. Because those words, being misrepresented, undermined Harry's confession just moments after he made it. The judge froze. Reporters froze. Harry froze. And Meghan, sensing the weight of every eye on her, took a slow breath and began crafting the version of the story she wanted the court to accept. But here's the truth. Once you listen closely, her story doesn't match Harry's at all. "First," she said, steadying her voice into something polished, "I want to make it clear that Prince Harry is overwhelmed. This is an emotional subject. There has been immense pressure placed on both of us, and I ask that the court give us space to present the facts clearly." Space. Present the facts clearly. Those three phrases were carefully chosen. They signaled that she was not confirming Harry's confession, she was reframing it. She continued, "The public narrative has been complicated. Yes, things were said out of fear. Yes, certain details were kept private for the protection of everyone involved. But the suggestion that we intentionally misled the public is inaccurate." Harry's head snapped up. Inaccurate. A direct contradiction to his apology. The judge noticed immediately. "So you are disputing your husband's statement?" the judge asked, voice tight. Meghan paused, calculating. "Direct question for you. Have you ever watched someone try to walk a tightrope while the rope is fraying under them?" That was Meghan right now. She couldn't outright deny Harry. That would make her look like she was calling him a liar. But she couldn't fully agree with him either. That would force her to reveal the truth she wasn't ready to show. She pushed forward. "I'm not disputing his feelings," she said. "I am clarifying the context." Context. A word people use when they are trying to soften the edges of a truth. "Prince Harry is correct that our situation was complex," she continued. "But the nature of that complexity is not being represented fully." Represented fully. Another phrase meant to blur, not clarify. Harry's face said it all. Confusion, tension, hurt. As if the truth he had struggled to articulate was now being reshaped into something he barely recognized. Meghan pressed on. "There were medical complications," she said firmly. "There were private medical decisions made by licensed professionals. There were agreements put in place to ensure our children's safety. And the documents referenced by Prince Harry, the ones that will be reviewed, have been taken out of context." Again, that word. Context. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Mrs. Markle," he said, "are you suggesting that the documents do not reflect the reality of your children's births?" Meghan hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, and it was enough for every seasoned journalist in that room to catch it. "No," she finally said. "I am suggesting they reflect only part of the reality. Part. Not whole. Part." That single word opened a vault of questions. What part was missing? What part had they carefully sculpted for the public? What part was too explosive to reveal until forced into a courtroom? Meghan's voice shifted again, not emotional, not fragile, but controlled, calculated, almost rehearsed. "There is a narrative circulating," she said. that Prince Harry and I structured some elaborate lie about our children. That is not the case. The truth is that we used alternative medical options that are becoming increasingly common for parents around the world. Alternative medical options, a phrase designed to sound modern, progressive, neutral, but vague enough to avoid specifics. The judge pressed again. Are you referring to the use of a gestational carrier? He asked bluntly. The room stilled. Harry flinched. Meghan's eyes sharpened again. And here, for the first time, she slipped. I am referring, she said carefully, to the use of an arrangement that allowed us to have our children safely. Not yes, not no. Another non-answer. But the judge wasn't done. Mrs. Markle, he said, Prince Harry stated minutes ago that neither of you are the biological parents of the children. Do you confirm or deny that statement? The question everyone was waiting for. The moment that should have clarified everything. But Meghan didn't answer directly. At least, not at first. Instead, she shifted to emotion, one of the most powerful tools she had always relied on. This, she said, her voice softening, is an incredibly painful topic, not just for us, but for the people involved in bringing our children into this world. These are private, sensitive matters, and I believe the way they're being portrayed right now is unfair. Unfair. To whom? To her? To Harry? To the biological parents? The judge stayed firm. Mrs. Markle, the court is not asking you to describe sensitive medical procedures. The court is asking for clarity. Are you or are you not the biological mother of these children? Another pause. Meghan's jaw tightened. She knew. This was the moment she had been trying to avoid. There was no more vocabulary to hide behind. No more phrasing to soften the truth. No more context to manipulate. She exhaled. I am not, she said quietly. The room collapsed into murmurs again. Reporters whispering. Legal teams scrambling. Harry closing his eyes, as if hearing the words aloud for the first time made the truth even heavier. But then Meghan added something that created the biggest contradiction yet. But Harry, she said quickly, is the biological father. Harry's eyes flew open. The courtroom erupted. Reporters nearly fell over one another. Someone actually shouted, "What?" Attorneys looked stunned. The judge had to call for order again. Because Meghan's statement directly contradicted Harry's. He had said neither of them were the biological parents. She now said only she wasn't. Which one was true? The judge turned to Harry. Prince Harry, do you confirm your wife's statement? Harry looked shattered, like he had been punched in the stomach. And in that moment, the moment where all he had to do was nod or shake his head, he didn't respond. Not yes, not no, just silence. Which is, in a courtroom, almost as revealing as a confession. The judge pressed him again. Prince Harry, are you the biological father? More silence. Meghan jumped in again, too quickly. He is, she insisted. But the judge raised a hand. Mrs. Markle, he said sternly, I am not asking you. I am asking Prince Harry. Harry finally spoke, but his answer wasn't an answer at all. I want the documents to speak for themselves, he whispered. The room murmured again. Because that meant only one thing. The documents contradict them both. Think about that for a moment. Harry and Meghan were standing in the same courtroom, facing the same judge, at the same time, answering the same question. But they weren't telling the same story. Harry said neither of them were the biological parents. Meghan said she wasn't, but Harry was. Harry deferred to the documents. Meghan tried to correct him. Harry looked defeated. Meghan looked cornered. The contradictions were growing like a storm cloud, and everyone in the room felt it. So the judge asked one final question. Mrs. Markle, he said carefully, if Prince Harry is the biological father, who is the biological mother? Every reporter's pen froze. Every head swiveled toward Meghan. Every breath held. Because this was the question she did not want asked. Meghan's eyes darted toward Harry, then toward the attorneys, then toward the judge. Her composed exterior flickered for the first time. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She took a breath, then held it. She looked like someone searching for the least damaging of many dangerous answers. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. That information, she said shakily, is protected. Protected. Protected by whom? Protected why? Protected from Harry? Protected from the public? Protected because of the nature of the arrangement? Protected because of the person involved? The judge didn't accept that. This court, he said, has the authority to unseal all relevant documents. And Meghan's reaction, the slight step backward, the widening of her eyes, the tension rising in her shoulders, told everyone the same thing. There is someone involved in this story. Someone they tried to protect. Someone they tried to hide. And someone whose identity could blow this entire case apart. But before anyone could ask more, before the judge could press further, before Harry could add anything, a court clerk stepped forward with a sealed envelope. This, the clerk announced, is the document the court requested. The one submitted anonymously. Anonymously, meaning even Harry and Meghan didn't know who provided it. Meghan looked horrified. Harry looked like his heart was about to stop. And that sealed envelope? It contained the name of the person neither of them wanted exposed. Have you ever felt a room shift before anyone speaks? That eerie, electric moment when something unseen enters the space. Something heavy enough to change the entire atmosphere? That's exactly what happened the second the clerk placed the sealed envelope onto the judge's bench. The envelope didn't look special. Plain, off-white, unmarked. But the weight behind it, the implication of it, was massive. Because the instant it hit the wood, Meghan's entire posture changed. Her hands tightened. Her shoulders rose. Her breath caught for a split second. And Harry? His face drained of color like someone had swept his bones clean. That envelope wasn't just a document. It was a threat, a revelation, a bomb, and the judge knew it. Which brings us right to the hook. What happens when the truth you've been hiding in shadows is suddenly placed in someone else's hands? Someone who has the power to expose it all at once. That's where Chapter 3 begins. The judge held the envelope without opening it, almost as if he could feel the tension pulsing from the paper inside. He looked at Harry. He looked at Meghan. Then back at the envelope. His voice, when he finally spoke, cut through the tension like a blade. This document, he said slowly, was submitted anonymously early this morning. It alleges to contain information directly relevant to the parentage of the children and the circumstances surrounding their births. Every reporter lifted their heads. Every attorney stiffened. The oxygen in the room thinned. Anonymous. Relevant to parentage. Submitted today. This wasn't planned. This wasn't part of the existing evidence. This wasn't something Harry or Meghan expected. And that meant someone close enough to know their secret, wanted the truth exposed. Harry shifted in his seat, fingers trembling slightly as he gripped the table. Meghan raised her chin a little higher, putting on the mask she always used in moments of pressure. Composure, control, image. She wasn't just bracing for impact. She was trying to reclaim authority. Your Honor, she said, voice controlled but forced, we object to the use of any anonymous filings. This could be forged. It could be misinformation. It could be. The judge didn't let her finish. This envelope has already undergone preliminary authentication. The court has reason to believe its contents are genuine. Meghan's breath caught again, almost imperceptibly, but enough for every journalist with a trained eye to write it down. Harry whispered something to her under his breath. 3 words reporters later attempted to lip-read from video footage. I told you. But told her what? That someone might expose them? That their secrecy was falling apart? That the truth wouldn't stay buried forever? Whatever it was, Meghan didn't respond. Instead, she kept her eyes locked on the envelope, like she was trying to mentally set it on fire before it was opened. The judge took a moment, scanning the courtroom with the expression of a man who knew exactly how explosive the next step would be. Before we review this, he said, I want to reiterate that Prince Harry has acknowledged discrepancies in the public narrative. Mrs. Markle has provided her own version of events. But neither statement aligns with the documentation previously submitted to the court. There it was, the contradiction exposed. Loud, plain, inescapable. Harry slumped slightly in his seat. Meghan's jaw tightened hard enough to show tension along the sides of her face. The judge continued. Therefore, the court will now demand the full production of all relevant documents. Medical records, contractual agreements, confidentiality statements, and any communication related to the births of the children. A ripple of shock hit the room. Because this wasn't a request. It was an order. Harry squeezed his eyes shut. Meghan's eyebrows lifted in a split second of stunned disbelief. The kind you see when someone realizes a situation is slipping through their fingers faster than they can grab it. Your Honor, she said sharply, there are privacy concerns. Mrs. Markle, the judge interrupted calmly. The court will review the documents in private session before releasing relevant portions. But this matter cannot proceed without full transparency. Full transparency. Two words that function like acid when applied to a carefully constructed secret. Harry looked like he was about to speak, but Meghan pressed her hand over his, quiet but firm. A gesture that said, "Don't make this worse. Don't say anything else. Don't lose control." The judge continued. "These documents must be produced today." Meghan stiffened. "Today?" she repeated, disbelief dripping into her tone. "Today." A long silence settled in the room. And then the judge broke it by addressing Harry directly. "Prince Harry, do you understand that the court requires access to the full surrogacy agreements and genetic parentage reports?" Harry's shoulders tensed. There it was. Surrogacy agreements. Genetic parentage reports. The reality Harry had desperately tried to handle with honesty, and the reality Meghan kept attempting to soften with careful language, was now on the table in black and white legal terms. Harry nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." But the judge wasn't finished. "And do you understand that failure to produce these documents will be considered obstruction?" Harry's voice wavered but remained audible. "I understand." Then the judge turned to Meghan. "Mrs. Markle, do you also understand?" The tension in her face hardened, just a shade too long before she nodded. "Yes," she replied, but the word was strained, forced through clenched teeth. And here's where things grew even stranger. Because Meghan didn't stop there. She leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering, softening, taking on a tone that seemed designed to influence perception. "Your Honor, I need to emphasize that the agreements we are referring to involve individuals who are not present. Individuals who did not consent to public exposure. Individuals who..." But the judge cut her off. "This court is not concerned with public exposure, only with the truth." And in that moment, something flickered across Meghan's expression, frustration, fear, and something else reporters couldn't quite identify. Was it anger? Panic? Or the realization that she had lost control of the situation entirely? Harry looked over at her, almost pleading for her to stop. But Meghan kept going. "These documents," she said tightly, "were signed under circumstances that are highly sensitive. There were emotional considerations. There were legal limitations. There were personal factors that cannot simply be laid bare." "Mrs. Markle," the judge interrupted again, firmer this time. "This is a legal proceeding. The circumstances will be reviewed." Meghan closed her eyes briefly, a restraint tactic, centering herself, realigning her strategy. Reporters described it as the moment she switched from defensive mode to offensive mode. She straightened in her chair, opened her eyes, and said, "Then I request that the court review not only the documents but also the communications between medical professionals, legal representatives, and all third parties involved. Because if we are doing this, Your Honor, we should do it fully." The courtroom buzzed again. This wasn't clarity. This wasn't transparency. This was strategy. She was trying to widen the scope, possibly to implicate more people, dilute responsibility, or shift focus from the documents that mattered most. Harry stared at her in disbelief, shaking his head very slightly, as if silently begging her not to escalate the situation. But Meghan was in full tactical mode now. "Very well," the judge said unfazed. "The court will subpoena those communications as well." And then the judge lifted the envelope. Everything went silent. That silence was dense. The kind that presses against your ears. It felt like time paused. Even Meghan held her breath. Harry's fingers curled into fists. The judge didn't open it. Not yet. He simply tapped the envelope lightly against the bench and said, "Before we open this, the court will take a brief recess. Prince Harry, Mrs. Markle, you will remain available in the side chamber." A collective exhale rippled across the room. The recess lasted only 15 minutes. But here's the part no one expected. The drama didn't stop. In fact, the most explosive moment of the day happened during that recess. Because as Harry and Meghan were escorted toward the private side chamber, a woman stood up from the back row. She had been sitting quietly the entire time, unnoticed by most. No reporters had recognized her. No cameras had lingered on her. No one seemed aware of her presence at all, until she spoke, and her one sentence froze everyone in place. "I'm ready to testify," she said. "What's the scariest thing that can happen right after you've confessed the biggest secret of your life?" A secret witness standing up in the back of the courtroom and saying, "I'm ready to testify." That moment didn't just shift the atmosphere, it detonated it. Because the second those 5 words rang through the space, Harry stopped mid-step. Meghan froze entirely. The bailiff blinked in confusion. Reporters jerked upright like they'd been shocked. And the judge, who had been halfway out of his chair for recess, slowly sat back down. Every eye locked onto the woman standing in the back row. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't emotional. She looked calm. Too calm. And that calmness was precisely what made the tension spike. Harry's face drained instantly. Meghan's lips parted in disbelief. And in that tiny pocket of silence, you could feel the entire narrative of the case pivot. Because whatever this woman knew, whatever she saw, whatever role she played, Harry and Meghan did not want her speaking. That alone told the courtroom everything it needed to know. But who was she? Let's paint the moment as it truly unfolded. The woman stepped forward cautiously, almost respectfully, as though she knew she was interrupting protocol, but also understood she had the right to do so. She moved with an air of quiet authority, not arrogance, not drama, but certainty. She wore no flashy jewelry, no designer handbag, no trademark Hollywood polish. Her clothing was modest, professional, understated. The kind of attire someone wears when they don't want attention, but the truth forces it on them. The judge narrowed his eyes. "And you are?" he asked. The woman glanced briefly at Harry and Meghan before answering. "My name," she said, "is Eleanor Shaw." A name that meant nothing to the reporters, at least not yet, but meant everything to Harry and Meghan. Harry's breath hitched. Meghan's fingers dug into her own arm with a tension so sharp it left red marks. And in that split second, the question no one had dared ask now hung openly. Who is Eleanor Shaw? And why were Harry and Meghan terrified of her? The judge motioned her to come forward. "Ms. Shaw," he said carefully, "what is your relevance to this case?" But before she could respond, Meghan stepped forward with unexpected urgency. "Your Honor," she said sharply, "this person is not a relevant witness. She has no legal standing in this matter." Eleanor turned toward Meghan, and the look she gave her was chillingly calm. "That's not true," Eleanor said quietly. "And you know it." The courtroom gasped. Meghan flinched. Harry looked away. That one sentence, "and you know it," carried the weight of a truth buried so deeply it could only surface in a space like this. The judge raised a hand to silence the rising whispers. "Ms. Shaw," he said firmly, "please state your connection to the matter." Eleanor took a slow breath. "I was involved," she said, "in the arrangements for both children." Silence. Dead silence. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Not a shuffle. Meghan's face went blank. Harry looked like someone had punched the air out of him. The judge leaned forward. "Please elaborate," he said cautiously. Eleanor nodded once, as though preparing herself. "I am," she said, "the liaison who managed the surrogacy process." That single sentence was enough to ignite the courtroom into panic. Reporters gasped. Someone dropped a pen. Several attorneys began furiously digging through their files. And the energy in the room snapped into something electric, frantic, almost feral. Because now everything Harry hinted at, everything Meghan tried to soften, was beginning to crystallize. Surrogacy. A liaison. Arrangements. Not rumors. Not speculation. Not internet theories. An actual witness confirming it. But it didn't end there. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Shaw, are you stating that you facilitated surrogacy agreements for Prince Harry and Mrs. Markle?" Eleanor sighed. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but with the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a secret for far too long. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "I facilitated both agreements. I worked directly with the medical team. I oversaw the communication between all parties involved, and I was present during the complications." Complications. That word sent another shockwave through the room. Harry rubbed his eyes, shoulders collapsing slightly. Meghan's expression hardened into steel. The judge took a beat, absorbing the bombshell. "Ms. Shaw," he said, "why have you stepped forward now?" Eleanor's eyes softened, and for the first time, the emotional undercurrent behind her calm demeanor surfaced. "Because," she said, "my name is in that envelope." The envelope. The anonymous document. The one Meghan was terrified of. The one the judge hadn't opened yet. Harry looked like someone had poured ice water down his spine. Meghan's hands balled into fists. Eleanor continued, voice steady. And because the version of events being suggested here is incomplete, my involvement was not simple. It was not straightforward. And it is not something I can allow to be twisted. Twisted. Incomplete. Not straightforward. Every word added a new layer of mystery. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Shaw, he said, are you implying that the court has not been given accurate information? Eleanor didn't hesitate. Yes. A reporter in the third row muttered, oh my God. Another whispered, this just blew the roof off. The judge immediately motioned for the bailiff. Ms. Shaw, he said, I need you to wait in the witness room. You will be called when the court resumes. But Meghan, who had been holding herself together through sheer force, finally snapped. This is outrageous, she said, stepping forward sharply. She has violated confidentiality. She has broken agreements. She is lying to protect herself. But Eleanor didn't back down. No, Meghan, she said quietly. I'm here because the truth was going to come out anyway. And you know exactly why. Meghan froze. Because there was something in that tone, something weary, something personal, that suggested a deeper history. Something more than a professional relationship. Something far more complicated. Harry's voice broke through the tension, soft and pleading. Eleanor, he said, please, don't. But Eleanor shook her head. It's too late, Harry, she said gently. You know it is. You could feel the emotional history pulsing in the space between them. Harry wasn't talking to a stranger. Meghan wasn't arguing with a stranger. This woman was woven into the story in a way far deeper than anyone expected. A reporter whispered loudly enough for half the court to hear. Was she the biological mother? The judge slammed the gavel. Order. But the question hung in the air like a ghost refusing to leave. Eleanor's face didn't reveal the answer, but the pain in Harry's expression did. Meghan's fury wasn't toward a random witness. It was toward someone who had the power to ruin her. Someone she had desperately hoped would never surface. Someone whose existence alone rewrote the entire narrative. The judge ordered Eleanor to step into the witness chamber. She walked past Harry and Meghan without looking at them. Harry hung his head. Meghan glared at her, not with anger alone, but with a sharp, cold kind of fear. Because whatever Eleanor knew, whatever she carried, whatever role she played, Meghan had spent years ensuring it stayed buried. Now, that burial was over. When the witness door closed behind Eleanor, the judge turned to Harry and Meghan with a gravity that pulled the entire courtroom back into silence. Prince Harry, he said carefully, this matter is no longer limited to documents. A direct witness to the arrangements has stepped forward. This court will require full disclosure. Harry nodded, broken. But Meghan wasn't done fighting. Your Honor, she said quickly, we object to her testimony. She signed a confidentiality clause, and she signed it under duress. The voice came from behind. Everyone whipped around as Eleanor's attorney, who had entered quietly during the chaos, stepped forward. The judge's eyebrows shot up. Duress, he repeated. The attorney nodded calmly. Yes, Your Honor. And under U.S. law, a contract signed under duress is voidable. My client is prepared to provide evidence. Meghan went rigid. The attorney continued. We have emails, messages, documents indicating pressure, coercion, and attempts to restrict Ms. Shaw's communication after the births. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras clicked violently. Harry covered his face with both hands. Meghan's mouth actually fell open, the first time she lost her practiced composure entirely. The judge breathed out slowly. This changes everything. He then lifted the sealed envelope. If Ms. Shaw's name is indeed inside this document, he said, we will be opening it first when we reconvene. Harry whispered, please don't. Meghan whispered, this is a mistake. But the judge ignored them. Court will reconvene in 10 minutes. Harry and Meghan were escorted to the side chamber, but not before Meghan turned and shot one last look at the closed witness door. A look filled with fear. A look filled with fury. A look that said Eleanor Shaw was the person she had prayed would never appear. But she had. And in Chapter 5, when the envelope is opened and the DNA file comes into play, the truth hits harder than anything you've heard so far. Because the test results contradict everyone. What's worse than a secret finally catching up with you? A secret backed by scientific proof, cold, clinical, emotionless proof that doesn't bend to narrative, reputation, or royal branding. That's what Harry and Meghan were walking toward as they were escorted into the side chamber. They weren't heading into a conversation. They were heading toward the kind of truth you can't negotiate. Because the moment the recess ended, the moment everyone returned to their seats, the moment the judge lifted that envelope again, the courtroom felt less like a legal space and more like ground zero. You could practically feel people gripping their armrests, phones on silent, pens hovering, reporters leaning forward so far they were nearly falling off the benches. The bailiff called the court back into session, and the judge, without ceremony, without hesitation, held the sealed envelope up to the light. He didn't open it right away. He waited. He let the weight of it sink into everyone's bones. Then he said, "This document, submitted anonymously, alleges to be the certified genetic parentage report conducted at the time of each child's birth." A ripple of gasps. Harry lowered his head, eyes glassy. Meghan stared straight ahead, expression locked, jaw tight. Eleanor Shaw's attorney sat silently but confidently, as if she already knew what was inside. The judge continued. Such a report would include genetic material comparisons, medical confirmations, and the identification of all biological contributors. All biological contributors. That phrase alone sent a swarm of questions ripping through the room. Because parentage reports don't lie. They don't shift. They don't soften. They don't dance around wording the way Meghan had. They don't tremble like Harry had. They reveal the truth. The judge slid a finger beneath the flap and tore the envelope open. Not fast, not dramatically, but deliberately. Every breath in the room paused. Inside were several folded documents and a flash drive. The judge spread the papers across his desk, scanning the first few lines. The deeper he read, the more his expression changed. Not shocked, not emotional, but progressively stern. Like he was reading something that confirmed suspicions he didn't want confirmed. Harry squeezed his eyes shut. His hands were shaking. Meghan kept her chin high, but her throat moved in a tight swallow. Finally, the judge spoke. "This," he said carefully, "is the official parentage report for Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor." Silence. Absolute silence. The judge lifted the first sheet and read aloud. According to the analysis, neither Prince Harry nor Meghan Markle share genetic markers with the infant identified as Archie Harrison. Harry's shoulders folded inward. Meghan blinked rapidly, the twitch she gets when trapped. A journalist in the back actually muttered, "Whoa." The judge continued, voice firm. The report clarifies that the child was conceived through anonymous donor genetic contribution, gestational carrier involvement, and third-party medical supervision. Anonymous donor. Gestational carrier. Third-party involvement. That alone was enough to send shockwaves across the world. But then the judge expanded. Further documents indicate that multiple individuals were involved in the process, including medical professionals, intermediaries, and a liaison listed as E. Shaw. There it was. Eleanor Shaw's name. On the official document. The one Meghan insisted was out of context. The one Harry wanted to speak for itself. Meghan looked at Eleanor's attorney with piercing accusation. Harry looked like someone was peeling away the last layers of a truth he didn't want exposed. But the judge wasn't done. He lifted the next sheet. "This file," he said, "appears to be the parentage report for the child identified as Lilibet Diana." Meghan inhaled sharply, and for the first time all day, Harry whispered something audibly. "Please don't read it out loud." But the judge, bound by law, had no discretion. He read, "The findings confirm that Lilibet Diana was also conceived through anonymous donor contribution, with no genetic relation to Prince Harry or Meghan Markle." Reporters gasped again, louder this time. Chairs squeaked. Someone whispered, "This is impossible." But the judge kept reading. The report lists the same liaison, the same surrogacy team, the same medical network, and the same third-party donor profile. A single donor profile, not multiple donors, not a complex mix. One donor used for both children, one genetic contribution source, one biological mother, or biological father, or both. The judge did not elaborate, but the implications were massive. Harry and Meghan's reactions told their own stories. Harry looked physically ill, not because the information was new to him, but because hearing it spoken aloud felt like ripping open a wound. He had tried to confess. He had tried to own the truth. And now the court was doing it for him in a way he never anticipated. Meghan, on the other hand, stayed frozen. Not shocked, not emotional, just calculating. Because in that moment, she knew exactly what was coming. "Your Honor," she said suddenly, voice quivering but strained, "those reports were confidential. They should not be." The judge cut her short. "They are admissible. They directly contradict your statements." Meghan's jaw clenched so tightly the muscles trembled. But then came the detail no one expected. A detail that destroyed the last pieces of Meghan's narrative. The judge flipped to the final section of the file and read, "Additionally, the parentage reports confirm the genetic identification of both biological contributors for each child. Their identities are listed under sealed designation codes." Sealed, meaning they existed somewhere in the record. The truth had names, identities, profiles, and someone with access had sent that file to the court. The judge looked toward Eleanor Shaw. "Ms. Shaw," he said, "these reports list you as the primary liaison for both procedures. Can you confirm the accuracy of these documents?" Eleanor rose slowly. "Yes," she said. "Every line of those reports is correct." Meghan nearly snapped. "That's a lie," she shouted, voice cracking for the first time. "You manipulated the process. You." But Eleanor's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "a mess." Shaw is prepared to testify that she was pressured, financially and emotionally, to keep certain details hidden from the public and from legal authorities. Harry covered his face again. Meghan's mouth fell open in outrage. The judge focused sharply. "What kinds of details?" he asked. Eleanor spoke quietly. "The identities," she said, "and the fact that the same donor was used for both children." Someone in the room gasped so loudly it echoed. The judge froze. "So you are stating," he said carefully, "that the biological contributors for both children are the same?" Eleanor nodded once. Meghan shot her a glare that could burn through steel. Harry whispered something under his breath, too soft to be heard, but his lips shaped the words. "I knew it." The judge steadied himself, then asked the question that sent a chill through the entire courtroom. "Ms. Shaw, are you one of the biological contributors?" Every reporter jolted in their seat. Meghan's hand flew to her mouth. Harry looked like a man watching his world collapse. Eleanor didn't speak right away. She exhaled, slowly, sadly, and said, "Your Honor, the court needs to know that I was more than just a liaison." The room exploded into whispered speculation. Was she the surrogate? The egg donor? The biological mother? Or something else entirely? Harry's eyes filled with tears. Meghan shook her head violently. "No," she whispered, barely audible. She wouldn't. She couldn't. But Eleanor wasn't looking at Meghan. She was looking right at Harry. And what she said next locked the courtroom into shock. "Your Honor," she said, voice breaking for the first time, "I am one of the biological parents." Silence. The kind of silence that feels like gravity collapsing. Meghan stumbled backward against the table. Harry closed his eyes, the pain etched across his face undeniable. The judge gripped the bench. Eleanor breathed out shakily. "I never wanted this to come out this way," she said. "But I gave birth to both children." The courtroom erupted. Chaos. Shouts. Reporters scrambling. Security stepping in. The judge pounding the gavel. But through the noise, one thing was clear. The next chapter wasn't just about documents anymore. It wasn't just about timelines, or contradictions, or confessions. It was about Eleanor. Her role. Her history. Her involvement with Harry. Her relationship to Meghan. And why her identity had been suppressed so aggressively. But even more shocking, there's another clause, hidden in the surrogacy agreement, that explains exactly why Eleanor was chosen, who pressured her, and what the royals knew. What if the truth you've been hiding isn't just emotional, isn't just personal, but legal, written down, signed, sealed, and enforceable? What if the very lie you've been trying to protect is actually sitting on a piece of paper that carries more power than any PR strategy, any interview, any rehearsed public narrative? That's exactly what this chapter is about. Because when the courtroom finally calmed after Eleanor's earth-shattering revelation, that she was one of the biological parents and gave birth to both Archie and Lilibet, the judge didn't waste a single second. He knew this case was no longer about rumor, contradiction, or emotional persuasion. It was now about contracts, agreements, Legal obligations. The kind of documents that reveal intentions and expose the truth behind decisions. And what the court was about to read would shock everyone, not just because of what it contained, but because of what it tried to prevent. Let's pick up right where the chaos left off. The gavel slammed repeatedly as reporters shouted questions, attorneys scrambled for their files, and Meghan physically backed into the table as though the floor was falling out from under her. Harry sat down heavily, gripping the edge of the bench like his body could barely hold itself upright. Eleanor remained standing, hands shaking, chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. Not from fear, but from the emotional weight of finally saying aloud what she'd been forced to hide for years. When order returned, the judge spoke with a gravity that silenced every whisper. "This court," he said, "must now review the surrogacy agreement in full." A single sentence. But that sentence detonated another wave of tension. Because if the parentage reports confirmed the facts, the surrogacy agreement would confirm the motives. Harry looked down, eyes red. Meghan stiffened, chin raised, trying to regain control. Eleanor's attorney placed a large binder on the judge's bench, the full agreement, tabbed, dated, and notarized. The courtroom fell into a slow, collective inhale. And then the judge began reading. "This agreement," he said, "was drafted 3 months prior to Archie's birth and revised before Lilibet's." Already the timeline raised eyebrows. 3 months before the first birth? Meaning the narrative Meghan told about going into labor was crafted while a surrogate was legally carrying the child. The judge continued. "This agreement outlines the responsibilities of the intended parents, the rights of the gestational carrier, confidentiality clauses, and compensation." Compensation. That word triggered a storm of murmurs. The judge lifted his hand for silence. Then he turned to the section the world would soon know as Clause 14b. One line, one sentence, and one of the most explosive revelations in royal-adjacent legal history. Clause 14b. In the event that the biological contributor is personally known to either intended parent, acknowledgement of said contributor shall remain undisclosed indefinitely to protect familial stability, public image, and succession considerations. Silence. Pure silence. Harry pressed his hands over his face. Meghan exhaled sharply, a near gasp she couldn't suppress. Eleanor closed her eyes as though revisiting a trauma. The judge read it again, slower this time. In the event that the biological contributor is personally known to either intended parent. Reporters exchanged stunned looks. Personally known, meaning Harry or Meghan knew the biological parent.